It's just a normal Wednesday in middle school. You're excited because it was taco day at the cafeteria, but all of those delicious spices, they're starting to get to you. You even made the mistake of helping yourself to a friend's refried beans that they didn't finish. You sit in the back of the class, desperately waiting for the bell to ring. You can feel the effects of your dietary decisions coming back to haunt you. Taco day is a dangerous day. With only 15 minutes before the final bell rings. School ended at 4:10, and I was like, come on, how slow can it go? You interrupt your teacher's lecture by releasing a bellowing flatulence that echoes throughout this small room. Your face turns bright red as your classmates turn around to stare at you and laugh. Luckily, you came prepared for just such an occasion. One of your parents works at a secret government lab, and you took the liberty of borrowing their prototype Neuralyzer from their home office before school. You pull out the cigar-shaped wand, put on a pair of sick Ray-Ban sunglasses. And you press the button. With a flash of bright light, the room goes silent. Everyone is just staring at you with a blank, stupefied expression. You put away your sunglasses, and you politely thank the teacher for telling the class they could go home early as you quietly pack your bags and head calmly towards the door. Granted, this sort of scenario is not really the intended purpose of the Men in Black's Neuralyzer, but if this technology is possible, it's the sort of thing that would absolutely happen at some point. I think my greatest use personally for this device would be like, wow, that was a great movie. Use it on myself and just go and enjoy the movie again. It's like, you know, when you've watched a TV show and you've had a few too many beers and you're like, don't really follow what's going on, and you watch it the next day and you're like, it's just as good a second time around, I know I can follow it. Love that. In the Men in Black movies, they are a non-governmental organization that regulates and monitors alien activities on Earth while preventing civilians about finding out about it. In conspiracy culture, it's a little bit something different. The Men in Black are shadowy men in black suits, possibly affiliated with the US government, and they show up after UFO sightings to ensure witnesses understand that they absolutely did not see anything at all. Either way, there's a major conspiracy element involved, which is great for our purposes today. It turns out that a neuralyzer should technically be scientifically possible, which is a nice change of pace for the science of science fiction, but how practical it would be depends entirely on how much you believe in conspiracies. How does the neuralyzer work? So, there is actually a full name for the neuralyzer, and it's the electro-biomechanical neurotransmitting zero synapse repositioner. Yes, really. The name is probably meant to be self-explanatory, but it sounds a bit like word salad, so let's dig a little deeper on how the device is actually described as working. When the button is pressed to activate the neuralyzer, it emits a flash of light. This light is supposed to isolate and manipulate the electrical impulses in the brain that control memory. There's not really a better explanation for how it works, which is both good and bad for our purposes, and just sort of the nature of science fiction. How does the ship go forward, Geordie? It's got a warp engine, doesn't it, Geordie? It's bad because it doesn't give us much of a starting point, but it's good because it means that if there is literally any way to affect memory using light, then we could say that it counts as a neuralyzer. A win for this channel. The device also includes a series of dials labeled as minutes, hours, and weeks, which are then used to determine what length of time will be erased. It's been shown that the neuralyzer is capable of erasing multiple years from a person's memory, but that's probably more than a little bit ambitious for our purposes today. The Men in Black protect themselves from the flash of light by the use of their special Ray-Ban sunglasses, a terrible pun turned brilliant advertising opportunity. Once the memory has been erased, the victims are left in a highly suggestible trance-like state where the operator of the neuralyzer can implant false memories to explain what was just happening. There is also a deneuralyzer that is capable of restoring the memories that were wiped through the neuralyzer, though this is not a standard issue for the Men in Black, but it's good as it exists because at some point someone's going to definitely mess it up. Look, as we said, this erasure of memory using light is technically possible, but it's currently not quite as clean as this, to the surprise of absolutely nobody. It's actually a much more brute force approach of mice and memories. So far, all of the testing done thus far in the field has been performed on mice. This means there's no guarantee that it will work in human brains, but it is promising thus far. Human brains and mice brains are 90% similar, which makes you feel really stupid, but it also makes them useful for testing. But that 10% difference is still a lot. Remember, every human being is 99.99% identical, which means, yep, you're 99.99% the same as Jeffrey Dahmer. That's a comforting thought. So, small changes can be a huge deal when it comes to biology. Yes, otherwise there'd be a lot of Jeffrey Dahmers. Anyway, the key to the Neuralyzer lies in a new technique called Optogenetics. The first step is to create an inert virus that injects a photosensitive protein in the neurons of the mouse's brain. Alternatively, they can also genetically engineer mice to express this protein. Regardless of the method, the key is to get this light-sensitive protein into specific regions of the mice's brains. The protein is only expressed when the neuron fires, and specific antibiotics can be used to prevent this protein expression. This means that the experiment can essentially be turned on and off, and the same mice can be used as both the control group and the test group. Unfortunately, once the protein is in place in the targeted regions of the mouse's brain, then the next step is going to be brain surgery. A fiber optic cable was implanted directly into the mice's brains that could emit a pulsating light to stimulate the protein expression in these neurons. Low-frequency light pulses would weaken the connections, thus erasing the memories. However, high-frequency light pulses would strengthen the connections and restore the memories, and it is insanely cool that this is actual science. So, how exactly did the experiment end up playing out? The mice were placed in a cage and subjected to mild electric shocks while these optogenetic neurons were turned on. The fiber optic light was later used to activate those neurons again while the mice were removed from the cage. This triggered the same fear response in the mice that they exhibited while they were in the cage, indicating that scientists had pinpointed the location of their memory of being shocked. These neurons were then exposed to low-frequency light pulses. Once the mice were returned to the cage, they went about their business as normal with no memory of ever having experienced discomfort in this location. Using high-frequency light pulses, they could restore the memories and bring back the fear response. The lead author of the University of California, San Francisco study stated in an interview, "We were playing with memory like a yo-yo," a sentiment that would lead us to believe that this will not be approved for human testing anytime soon. Also, whoever volunteers for that is an insane person, or it would have to pay so much money. What are you going to do? Well, we're going to give you a virus that alters your brain, and then we're going to do brain surgery on you, and then we're going to remove your memories after giving you an electric shock. Yes, please, I'll take that. So that covers the functions of both erasing and restoring memory. But could light also be used to implant false memories? Well, according to researchers at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, it can, and they totally did. According to a slightly more skeptical and pedantic reading of the research, though, where it's not really that simple. The same optogenetics process was used to prep the mice for the second experiment. First, the mice were placed in a happy, safe environment referred to as Box A. They went about their mousy business and created a memory of the environment. The mice were then placed in a second environment, cleverly referred to as, yes, you got it, it's Box B. Once they were in Box B, the fiber optic cable was used to stimulate their memory of Box A while they were simultaneously administered an electric shock. This caused their memory of Box A to be linked with the shock that they received in Box B. The mice were then returned to Box A, where they exhibited a fear response despite having never actually been shocked while in that environment. But is this actually creating a false memory? The mice really had been in Box A and they really had been shocked. Those things just didn't happen at the same time. It's like that time you got sushi from that one place and then you got really sick afterwards. Even though, let's say, the sushi didn't make you sick and you rationally know that, but it's still been years since you've eaten anything from that particular restaurant. Absolutely been there. The scientists definitely created a false association, but it's very different from the process performed by the Neuralyzer. The trance-like state produced by the Neuralyzer would allow you to wipe a person's mind of having just seen aliens and implant a false memory that they had just been an extra in a commercial or something like that. Without having an incredibly complex and intricate mapping of all of a person's memories, it seems unlikely that a false memory could be created nearly as easily as a false association. And that's if it's even possible at all, which honestly seems pretty dubious. So, now that we have the theoretical makings of at least the memory erasure elements of the Neuralyzer, how exactly are we supposed to make this work on humans without implanting wires into everybody's brains? Not to mention that virus that literally changes your genes. After all, Neuralyzers were used on groups of unsuspecting members of the public. The agents erasing their memories didn't have any advanced knowledge of who they'd be using the Neuralyzers on, which means that whatever our plan is, it needs to be something that would be effective on the entire population. And this calls for a high-level government conspiracy. Conspiracy theory. The idea of covertly performing brain surgery on every person in the country to install fiber optic cables that can be remotely controlled by the government is a bit too outlandish even for our conspiracy theory. Instead, we're simply going to poison the water supply. Of course, there's already a lot of people who are afraid of fluoridated tap water, so we'll probably want to poison as much of the food as possible as well. We mentioned earlier that in addition to creating genetically engineered mice, the photosensitive proteins can be injected into the neurons by the use of inert viruses. This method of introducing optogenetics to the civilian population via tainted food and water is going to be our key to success here. However, instead of having the viruses target specific parts of the brain, we're going to have them instead target the back of the eyes. After all, we can't implant wires into everyone's brains to trigger the proteins, can we? That would be ridiculous. A company named RetroSense was trying to use optogenetics in this way to restore sensitivity to light in blind people. RetroSense was then purchased by a pharmaceutical company that was later purchased by another pharmaceutical company, so it's difficult to determine whether or not this project is now dead in the water. Either way, the important thing is that scientists believe that it was possible to transmit signals to the brain using this method. If these proteins were only sensitive to the light generated by a neuralyzer and not the normal spectrum of visible light, it's possible then that they could be used to transmit some sort of signal to the rest of the brain. If our goal is to erase these memories, causing the brain to somehow misfire may be our best bet to making this happen. We already know that light causing the brain to misfire is totally possible thanks to photosensitive epilepsy. This condition can result in seizures produced by bright, repetitive light. Maybe you remember back in the 1990s when an episode of Pokemon anime caused a meteor storm by inducing seizures in hundreds of Japanese schoolchildren, and that was why. How we'd go from light-causing seizures to light-causing memory erasure is uncertain, but the fundamental mechanics that could theoretically make this possible are all really based in reality. Besides, this already makes way more sense than the average conspiracy theory does, so just roll with us here. Unfortunately, even if all of this were to work, it is doubtful that we could design our neuralyzers to delete a programmable amount of memories. We would most likely be restricted to a specific amount of time based on how we could design the inner workings of all this brain virus mumbo jumbo, and it's entirely possible that the results would be very unpredictable. Wrap up. So, can science wipe someone's memory? Well, if you're willing to sign an informed consent waiver to allow yourself to either be genetically engineered or infected with the virus that subject yourself to having your skull opened up and fiber optic cables connected to your brain, then yes, absolutely! Research indicates that science could absolutely wipe the memory of a very willing volunteer or a very unfortunate mouse. That's for unwilling participants. If you're willing to buy into a bunch of conspiratorial nonsense, then yes, just maybe it could be theoretically possible. Then again, optogenetics is still relatively new, having only been developed in 2005. It's possible that further research and advances will make the possibility of a neuralyzer much more realistic. Such a tool would be extremely dangerous and could of course have disastrous consequences. So if a neuralyzer does become possible, we can only hope that they would be extremely well regulated, if not entirely illegal, for obvious reasons. Historically, we at the Science of Science Fiction channel have told you that almost every cool piece of sci-fi tech that you've dreamed of owning is impossible. For us to inform you that something as seemingly outlandish as a neuralyzer could actually be possible is sort of an abnormally happy ending for one of our videos, except the neuralyzer could be used for so much bad. So, to bring this story to a more standard downbeat conclusion, we'd just like to inform you that following the experiments by MIT, all of the mice were killed so that their brains could be removed and examined. Have a brilliant day.